Thank you so much to UXRS for having me. I am extremely happy to be here and to contribute to this amazing community. Thank you to everybody who's joined this call. My name is Lisa, and my talk today is going to be about designing augmented reality applications and the value that immersive technology like AR can bring, particularly to a museum audience. So just to briefly introduce kind of what I do, I'm a user experience designer and strategist and a co-founder of L3A UX Studio. We are a studio in Brooklyn, New York. And we do design and research for a variety of different projects, many of which are in the immersive technology space, like virtual reality and augmented reality. And part of our work, particularly during the kind of initial discovery sessions, is having really in-depth discussions with our clients about what it is that we're designing for and why we're using a certain technology in the first place, other than the fact that it's new and shiny, like VR or AR, although I guess it's not that new and shiny anymore, but it kind of is. A lot of the times, clients don't really have a clear or good understanding or answer to some of these questions. So in my work and my research, I'm constantly thinking about this question. How do we as designers leverage these new immersive technologies in a way that goes beyond gimmick with real, thoughtful intention? As professionals in this industry, I truly believe that it's part of our job to advocate for meaningful use of technology and not just have tech for the sake of tech. So as it relates to AR, I've been asking myself these questions. What's a good use case for augmented reality, particularly mobile augmented reality? So on your phone, not in the glasses, although maybe next year we can talk about that when the Apple Pro Vision comes out. So what's a good use case for AR? What problems can AR solve? And where can it add real value? So that's kind of what I'm going to be talking about today. It's about revelations designing for AR, discoveries on its value when paired with the right content and when thinking about the right users, and what I've kind of learned in the process. So before we get into all of that, I want to make sure that you guys all have context and background to my thinking. So I'm going to give you a brief history lesson, a brief art history lesson. And I want you to forget for a second that this is a UX research and strategy event. And I want to take you back to the ancient world. And I want you to think about what you believe ancient Greece may have once looked like thousands of years ago. Okay? So this is what most people think of when they imagine ancient Greece. They think of pristine and stoic marble statues in museums like the Metropolitan, or the dusty white columns of structures like the Parthenon. Most people's image of antiquity is devoid of color, but there's a major problem with that image. And the problem is that it's a fundamentally inaccurate vision of antiquity. One of the biggest misconceptions of Western art history is that the Greco-Roman world was monochromatic, when it was anything but. In fact, the ancient world was extremely colorful. It looked vastly different than what we see today in most textbooks and at museums and at ancient sites. Most sculptures were vibrantly painted in blues and reds and greens, and sometimes they were covered in glimmering gold leaf. Here, you're looking at just a few color reconstructions of ancient artifacts from antiquity. So marble statues, classical architecture, ancient bronzes, all of them used to be covered in massive color details. So where does our notion of monochromatic antiquity come from in the first place? Well, much of it can be traced back to the Italian Renaissance. So we can loosely say between 1400 and 1600. And during this time period, statues from the ancient world, they were constantly being uncovered, kind of like what you see here in the 16th century etching. And most of the color pigment was actually gone due to centuries of deterioration. So people would see these unearthed statues, colorless statues, and they would take them at face value. So artists during the Renaissance period both revered and tried to mimic the ancient aesthetic. So sculptors like Michelangelo, who you're seeing here, they thought that they were emulating the ancient world with the lack of color, believing that the ancients left their works intentionally unpainted. And we know today that that's just not the case. There's an overwhelming amount of evidence, both art historical and scientific, that point to the fact that antiquity was colorfully painted. So here you're seeing this oil painting called Painting Breathes Life into Sculpture. It was through color and not just form that Greco-Roman artisans infused drama and emotion into their sculptures. Bronze was their canvas, not the finished product. So why does this all matter? Well, seeing this color on sculptures, it transforms our understanding of ancient art, its meaning, and the cultures that it comes from. When we start to see recreations of what ancient artifacts may have looked like originally, it completely changes our perception of antiquity. I like to say that if you come out of this talk having learned one phrase that's completely not relevant to UX or UX research or strategy, it's polychrome. Poly, many, and chrome, colors. Polychromy is the state of being multicolored, which is what antiquity truly was. So, art history lesson complete. Let's wind it back before I get carried away and return to today and this amazing event and my original questions. What's a good use case for AR? What problems can it solve? And where can it add real value? I wonder if you see where I'm going with this. My team wanted to bring the concept of polychromy to a museum audience in a way that's engaging, novel, and informationally rich. And we believed that in this situation, augmented reality was the right vehicle to tell the story of color in the ancient world. And here's what we came up with. And I'd just like to give a quick shout out to our collaborators on this project, which is Packet 39. They're based up in Canada. So this is the victorious athlete. He's a statue made over 2 millennia ago. He's a life-size Greek bronze created between 300 and 100 BC. And this is one of the few life-size bronzes left in the world. We tend to think of marble in relation to ancient Greece or Rome, but bronze statues were actually extremely common as well. There were thousands of bronze statues in antiquity. Today, so few remain because of the resale value of bronze. So most ancient bronzes have actually been melted down in order to make other objects like weapons and armor. But thankfully not this guy. This statue became one of our first subjects for an in-depth study of polychrome and telling its story through augmented reality. So originally, he probably looked more like this. And I'll get into all the nitty-gritty details of what we made, but first I want to take you through a little bit of our process and what led to some of our design decisions. So let's talk a little bit about what goes into actually designing AR experiences for museums in the first place, before we dive into this specific case study. So I'll start off with a little bit of audience research, and then we'll go from there. Our studio has taken on many projects in the museum space over the years, and we've really been thinking about what motivates people to go to a museum in the first place, and how might the products and exhibits that we design align with museum visitor needs. If you're interested in designing for museums, a really great resource to check out is John H. Fox's Understanding Museum Visitors' Motivations and Learnings. You can get a PDF of this online. This guy is an academic. He's not a UX researcher in the sense that I think many of us on this call are, but his studies I think are extremely insightful for designers who want to work in the museum space, regardless of whether or not you're doing an immersive tech project in museums or not. John and his team gathered tons of qualitative research on hundreds of museum visitors, and their analysis details how we can better understand visitor motivations in museums. And he's broken them down into 5 categories that you see here. I'm actually going to add a 6th one. In many of the museum projects that we've done, my team found that there was an extra visitor type that he didn't outline that was kind of important for us to consider, especially for this AR project. So let's quickly go over these. I'm not going to go into too much depth, but I do think that it's really valuable for designers in this space. And take into account that these could potentially be turned into more data-driven personas if that's something that you need to move your project forward. So let's start with the facilitator. So for us, this was a really critical visitor type and motivation for the projects, and I'll get into why a little bit later. Facilitators, these are museum goers whose aim is to provide a good experience for members of their group. So these can include teachers or parents or tour guides or docents. They're looking for tools that can help them interpret the collection within a museum and to facilitate that, and those tools could help them facilitate an educational and engaging experience for others. So those are facilitators. Next, we have experience seekers. Their motivation for being in a museum is because it's considered a landmark or an important destination. So their satisfaction primarily derives from the kind of been there, done that mindset. Kind of like, you know, if you're in New York, well, you have to visit the Met, or if you're in Paris, well, you have to visit the Louvre. On our end, we're thinking about these visitors because while they may not be as interested in taking a deep dive into the content, we can still give them an experience that feels satisfying. And for audiences like these, immersive tech like AR can really come in handy. Then we have the explorers. So these are museum visitors that are less after the experience thrill of visiting a museum, and they're more willing to engage in content and be curious if something is able to grab their attention and hold it while they're exploring. So in our case, they might be willing to interact with something novel like AR within a museum gallery. This next one, content seekers. These are ones that are thirsty for knowledge when they come to a museum. They're likely willing to dive deep into the content much more so than other visitors. So in our case, we were thinking of art history buffs or those that are really heavily interested in antiquity. Rechargers. These are the ones who come to a museum to have a contemplative experience. So maybe they're at the museum just to get away from the everyday chaos. Maybe they just want to be surrounded by art and beauty. For them, we want to make sure that technology and what we're creating doesn't get in their way and doesn't get in the way of their visit. So we don't want our experience to be disruptive to theirs. And then finally, that sixth category, that six groups that we've added, that's not on John's list. We call them along for the riders. So these are the people who aren't motivated to be in the museum at all. They're there because somebody brought them there, or maybe even dragged them there. You know, perhaps it's a child or it's a student in a school group. And AR, as we found, can be a really great tool to inspire this group of visitors. So hopefully that gives you a little glimpse into who museum visitors are and what motivates them to come to a museum. Next, I want to touch upon what we were considering early on in our design process, particularly as it pertains to AR within the context of a museum space. So we did a lot of ideation and built out many, many early prototypes for Colors of Antiquity, and I'll just show you a few of them. So in this first one, you're seeing one of our early prototypes with a model of Augustus of Prima Porta. So this statue is actually at the Vatican Museum, and it's one of the best known statues when it comes to polychromy because it has a lot of color preserved on it. And what we did is we bought just, a tiny little model on Amazon just to test out, kind of a proof of concept. And we were testing out both the concept and the initial interaction designs that we wanted to build in. So things like having the user swipe down the color onsets with their finger. And we found that people found that extremely satisfying with this early prototype. So that's Augustus of Prima Porta. Next is we wanted to do some testing on our concept within an actual museum environment, because that's kind of where we were going to have this experience. So this you're seeing here is Nabin and Nabita pair statues. So this is a statue at the Brooklyn Museum. And what we're doing here is we're testing our idea within the environment of a museum. So that includes museum lighting, which is extremely important. And here you can see the statue is actually encased in glass. So we also wanted to make sure from a technical perspective that our application works behind glass, and it does, which is pretty exciting. And then this last one, I'll be honest, it's kind of just for fun. It's a little bit silly, but really we were testing out different materials. So in this case, we wanted to make sure that our AR tracking could work on wood, in this case, a wood carving. And then we also wanted to play around with silly animations and just seeing how AR animations could work around the physical objects that's in front of you. So that's kind of our next set of tests there. And as we were making these prototypes and coming up with our concepts, there are many considerations that we had to keep in mind, particularly for AR in museums. And I'll share some of those with you, especially for those who are trying to design similar experiences. So what's important to think about? The physical context of your experience is extremely important. So is it going to be in an indoor space or in an outdoor space? You have to think about that. What are the lighting conditions and how do they change throughout the day? What's the space like? So we had one museum who was considering an AR experience in a room that replicated a Buddhist temple, and they were worried that having people come in and stick their phones out onto the sculptures would take away from the reverence of the space. It's a legitimate concern. So how do you deal with that? It's an interesting design challenge. Do you just say, okay, we're not going to do it at all? Maybe there's timed a timing situation where you can only do this experience between 12 and 1. Lots of interesting design challenges there. Visitor flow is very important if you're designing for museums and you're designing immersive tech in a museum space. So how busy does the space get? How busy does the gallery get? If you've ever been to the Greco-Roman galleries at the Met, you know that those galleries get really, really busy. So do you want a bunch of people standing around and potentially interfering with the walk spaces that are within that space? Is there room for visitors to move around safely? Do visitors have to walk around objects, or are they just standing in front of them and maybe there's a wall behind them? Those are all things that you need to be thinking about. Onboarding, really important. Any UX designer knows that onboarding is critical for any product. So what's the minimal on-screen instructions that are needed for an experience like this? Or maybe there are off-screen instructions, right? Maybe there's a QR code that somebody has to scan. In our case, that wasn't the case because we're scanning the actual object, so there was no need for a QR code. But in many situations, especially for web AR, you do need a QR code. So how do you put that AR code within the space of the gallery? Wi-Fi, we're going into the usage context. So Wi-Fi quality is extremely important. Some museums have really crappy Wi-Fi. If you're creating a web-based experience, then what do you do with that? Something to think about. The length of your experience is also really important. How long do you want to have visitors, stand around pointing their phones up? Should there be times when the device should be put down and they should take a break? What's the optimal device for the experience in the first place? We found that actually, depending on the proximity of the object and the size of the objects, sometimes a smaller device like a phone makes sense, and sometimes a larger device like a full iPad makes more sense. So the device is something that you have to be thinking about. And to that end, the deployment method is really critical from a strategic standpoint. So is the thing you're building going to affect museum operations? Is the experience that you're going to provide be handed out to visitors on a museum device, or do visitors download the app onto their own phone? All of these things you need to be thinking about when you're creating these experiences. And then visitor engagement. This is, something that we all are dealing with so many different products that we design. Visitor attention spans. Even the most diligent visitors aren't stopping at every exhibit and reading every label. Hopefully your product is more exciting than a museum label, but you do have to think about the fact that people's attention spans are really quite small and they're diminishing all the time. And then value add, enhance, don't distract. That comes back to the beginning of my talk. Why are the elements of augmented reality complementing the collection? Are you adding value? And in our case, here you can see our kind of initial hypotheses and our assumptions at the very beginning of this project. This is what we kind of aimed to prove. Why are we using AR for this project? We believed that it's a fresh, enriching way to learn about ancient art and culture, especially for young digital savvy visitors. We believe that visitors can see sculptures as they are today in front of them and as they might have been originally, with that AR feature. We believe that AR allows rich content display without compromising conservation or interfering with the exhibition space. You don't need to do anything with the exhibition space at all. You don't need projectors. You just need, a device with people's phones. And then we believe that immersive experiences can give visitors agency, tell a story, and ignite the imagination. So those were some of our early considerations for the projects as a whole. Now, let's go back to our victorious friend and let's talk about some of the specifics of the content, the features that were designed into the experience, and kind of what we learned along the way. Hope you guys are still with me. So with the victorious athlete, one of the first things that we did is that we scanned this guy using a process called photogrammetry. So we walked around the statue and we took about 1,000 photographs. And then we used a software that triangulated all of those images together to create a 3D model of the statue. So here you're seeing the 3D model and then the 3D model with texture on it. And we did a lot of research into the history of the statue and understanding statues like it. I like to note that this is like one of my favorite parts, one of the most exciting parts for me working in this field as a UX designer, as a UX researcher. I get to learn about so many different things within so many different genres. I have to understand the nuances of the content that I'm working with and figure out how it all fits together and how to thread an interesting, comprehensive narrative to the audience. So that's just a note for newbies that UX design is really fun. Anyway, talking with conservationists, with researchers, curators, we dug into the content of what this application would feature. And we looked at art historical references of similar statues, scientific research into polychromy, photo archives from when this guy was discovered. And all this research helped us create this reconstruction that you're seeing here of what every part of the statue may have once looked like. So as an example, the olive wreath that you're seeing on his head, wow, that was loud. The olive wreath that you're seeing on his head, which is corroded, uncolored, and barely visible, it was once intact and likely gilded gold and stood out against his painted hair. The eyes, which today are hollow, they were once inlaid into the socket, likely made of stone or glass or ivory, and made to look extremely realistic. And of course, his feet, now broken off, but we were able to recreate them because surely his feet were intact when this statue was first cast. The app is an entire augmented reality story of the statue. So visitors not only get to experience what it looks like in antiquity, but they get to see what it looked like when it was first found underwater in the 1960s. That's that middle image that you're seeing. So that middle image is a 3D model, which is based on archival photographs. So the statue was found encrusted in barnacles in marine life when it was pulled out of the water. And we were able to use the photographs of when it was first found to create the 3D model that you're seeing in the middle there. There's also a third AR chapter that reveals an X-ray view of the statue. So people can use their phone as an X-ray scanner and see what the statue looks like on the inside. And they can learn that most bronzes are actually hollow on the inside, or that the statue has this metal rod going through its body in order to stay mounted in the gallery. And the X-ray view even gives us hints into how this ancient sculpture was cast 2 millennia ago. There's lots of really interesting content in this mobile AR application, and I'm going to talk about a few features, particularly as they relate to what AR affords us, as well as the UX findings that we've come across when designing this and testing it within the gallery space with visitors. But before I get into that, what is the visitor experience like without AR? Well, people come into the gallery and they look at the statue and they have lots of questions. Most people don't bother reading the museum label. They wonder, who is this guy and why is he naked? They don't understand the meaning of his gesture. Is he scratching his head or is he just thinking? Almost nobody notices that olive wreath on his head. Some people think that he looks kind of sad or soulless, probably because he's missing his eyes. Some don't understand the condition that the statue was in. There were some students who didn't understand that this is deteriorated bronze. They thought maybe he has a skin disease or something. One of our goals when designing a museum experience like this is to answer some of those common questions that visitors have. So we're using AR as a teaching tool. And we found that the answers to many of these questions that I just outlined are actually more compelling through the lens of augmented reality. So as an example, who is he and why is he naked is a common question, and it's actually a layered response. So we know that he is the victor of some game because he's wearing an olive wreath on his head. And in antiquity, winners of Olympic Games would receive these olive wreaths as prizes. In the gallery today, that wreath is barely visible, so people don't notice or question it at all. But in AR, you really see its shiny gold against that painted hair. And then look at those eyes. It totally changes his expression. And then his gesture that we spoke about. If the wreath were intact, you could see that the fingers of the raised right hand probably would have touched that wreath. So perhaps he was touching this symbolic trophy of his. And just as a side note, his nakedness is actually another hint into him being an athlete, because back then athletes covered themselves in olive oil and they competed naked. So maybe after this talk, go and try that as a fun summer activity. Design museums, you get visitors from all walks of life, young, old, art history buffs, students, people who were dragged there by their spouses, everyone. And we wanted to account for all levels of engagement and all levels of familiarity with AR. So simplicity was key. We didn't want to overload the experience and make it feel complicated. We wanted people to get something out of it, regardless of whether or not they were going to dive deep into the content, like those content seekers may, or those that just wanted to see the recreations and move on, maybe like the experience seekers. And we've been collaborating with museums for some time now, and we've learned that for them, it's really important to communicate to visitors that a recreation is not the final truth, but a best guess. It's our current state of knowledge. So one of the benefits of using AR is our ability to show multiple versions of a recreation. So as a simple example, this statue's left hand, it's positioned in such a way that suggests that perhaps it may have been holding an object once. We don't know that for a fact, but we can speculate. So we created two versions of what this athlete may have been holding, either a palm branch or a victory ribbon. And visitors can toggle between these two versions to see how either object could have looked in his hands. And we deliberately emphasize speculation over facts, and we're being transparent about what we know for sure and what we don't. And this has proven to be really critical when working with museums, especially classical museums. And there's a lot of art historical references that support the guesses that we make. So he's a victorious athlete. He's the victor of the Olympic Games. And I told you that victors received olive wreaths as a prize. Well, they also received palm branches and ribbons in lieu of trophy and money. So in these ancient frescoes here, you can see references to all three of these trophy objects. We also found a way to highlight the speculative nature of the recreation by giving users agency. So here we provide a color slider that allows visitors to change the hue of the bronze right in AR, because the bronze may have actually been much lighter or much darker than what we show in the recreation. And the colors that we provide in the slider, they're all valid guesses as to what the bronze may have been. So visitors can actively partake in the speculation with us and participate. It's engaging actively with the content rather than taking in a passive display. Through lots of testing, we observed different visitor behaviors in museum spaces and behaviors with augmented reality in general. So some people are actually quite uncomfortable coming up too close to the statue and pointing a mobile device in its face. You know, they revere objects like this too much. In our case, this was a real problem. The statue is elevated, hello dog. The statue is elevated on a platform, so unless you come up close, it's hard to see some of the recreated details that we made, like the eyes. Another thing we noticed is that people were pinching their screens because the camera view was on, since it's AR, and they expected it to behave the same way that a camera app would or a photo app would. This was unexpected behavior for us, but we were seeing it quite a bit during testing. So to accommodate for this, we developed a custom zoom feature that allows visitors to zoom in, same as you would with a camera app. Some other people got way too close to the statue. And after observing this behavior and making museum guards really quite uncomfortable, we built in an AR guardian for visitors who get too close for comfort. So if somebody got too close to the statue, the app became inactive and users got an alert to take a step back. So with the AR, especially in public spaces like museums, we always have to be thinking about the context of the user's space and their physical surroundings, and design in safety precautions when necessary. Many museums that we've worked with were concerned that visitors would end up glued to their phones rather than looking up at the art, and that seemed like a legitimate concern. What we found was the opposite was true. people were actually using their phones as an investigation device, almost like this magic magnifying glass. They were coming up to the statue, they were examining it from all angles, and actually comparing and contrasting the AR recreation with the real world sculpture. And this type of active engagement way of learning. So traditional means of teaching art history, it often struggles to engage students. When I studied history, I had to endure so many boring museum lectures and dated art history textbooks. AR in the right context, it could actually provide students with exciting interactive experiences and new forms of learning. It can help improve learning outcomes and engage diverse learners. And then some of the meat of our findings. Museums today are experimenting with new ways of engaging with the public and telling stories. And this project proved to us that AR can be a powerful tool in the museum space for engagement and for learning. We did a ton of user testing with this app. And to be honest, visitor reaction was really quite phenomenal. People were really excited to use this. We had kids coming from school groups, and they'd come into the gallery and they'd kind of be bored and they'd roll their eyes that they have to look at this old piece of metal. And they just lit up when they got a chance to use this app. It completely changed their approach and level of engagement with this piece of art history. All of a sudden, they were excited to learn. And we know that people retain knowledge better when they're truly engaged. We also spoke to docents who do tours in the gallery. So remember back to when we were talking about facilitators. So docents are facilitators. And they told us that normally they ask people to use their imagination, close their eyes as they described in words what this object may have once looked like. We were able to give these docents a tool to improve their tours and their ability to tell a story. So we truly believe that this technology has space in museums. It adds rich meaning to the content and to the visitor experience in a way that we believe is not just gimmick. So what's next for our victorious friend? We are designing a quantitative study for this experience. I've talked a lot about kind of some of the qualitative research that we've done. We are aiming to quantify the validity and the effectiveness of using AR as a supplement to learning about polychromy on ancient statues. So this is an ongoing project for us. We're doing this in multiple spaces, and these continue to be our research goals with this project. These are kind of the questions that we're aiming to investigate. So we want to investigate visitor attitudes towards using AR in a museum setting. We want to evaluate the effectiveness of AR as a learning tool. We want to assess visitors' overall user experience with the app as a whole, the ease of use, the enjoyment, the perceived educational value. And then we want to determine if this technology appeals to a specific demographic, like young visitors, tech enthusiasts, or educational groups. To close out, I just have one final thought. I have been working in this space for several years now, and this industry is really, really fun. I realized that I just spent this whole session talking about what not to do and to not make tech gimmicky. So this slide might feel a little bit counterintuitive, but also we had so much fun goofing off in the process of creating this. This industry has so much potential, and it's just going to continue to grow with the release of all of these new devices. I don't think that this stuff is going away. And there are many excellent, excellent engineers and creative technologists working in this space. But what I find is that it's still very much in need of smart UX professionals. There is an enormous opportunity for UX designers and researchers and strategists to inhabit this space. So if you haven't already, I urge you to take on projects in spatial design and in emerging technology. This industry really needs people like you, like people in this call. So to that end, thank you so much. And I hope you got, thanks everyone.
So much, Lisa. We have quite a few questions for you that have been gathered through the chat. So if you don't mind, I'll just kind of throw them at you.
Let's go.
It's going to be fun. There's a lot of really interested people. And so I think One of the biggest things out there is there's a lot of questions around accessibility. So how was accessibility considered in this project? Were these the only way for visitors to see the original statue colors, or were there additional things out there for people who had maybe older phones or different kind of accessibility challenges? We'd love to hear your
Yeah.
thoughts.
Yeah, great question. Super important, especially in a museum environment. A few things. One is that we're aiming to have this project accessible, not for people who aren't on site. So not everybody could get into a museum like the Getty Villa, and they might want to experience this at home. So that's something that we're building into the project. And people can already see 3D models of both the current statue and the recreation and the barnacles and the X-ray, all of these things they can just view online, which is pretty great, just using a 3D viewing platform. The other thing that's important when you're thinking about something like this for on-site experiences is audio. Audio is really important. We saw that, the text sizes, because we have hotspots where you can actually read text about the different parts of the statue. Sometimes doing that in a museum isn't so much fun. So we're adding an audio component where you can actually just hook up your headphones and hear it spoken out to you. So that's helpful for people. The other thing is for people who don't have AR at all, they could see the 3D models when they're there without having the AR feature, but they can at least see the 3D models on their phones. So that's something that's helpful. Yeah, so those are some of the things that we're considering.
Yeah. Did you find an optimal experience length is another one of the questions that we've found in the chat for you.
Yeah, that's a great question. In our particular situation, it's one statue. And with one statue, we can hold your attention. And there's enough really rich content about one statue where people don't get kind of distracted. And there's a perfect amount of content that you can just kind of immerse yourself in this one statue and move on. However, we are now thinking about, well, what does it mean if an entire exhibition is like this? What if an entire exhibition with multiple statues within a gallery space is augmented in this way? Do we really want people, walking up to 10 different statues, 20 different statues, just like going like this? At one point, do we build in breaks? And at what point are people going to get tired? And I'll let you know when we find the results of that. I honestly don't have the answer yet. What I do know is that you definitely want to build in those breaks, because especially for a mobile device, doing this for more than a certain amount of time isn't fun.
Yeah. People are also really wondering how you collected this data. So when you were talking about gathering data from the visitors, how overt or discreet were you in your collection of that?
Consider it at first just guerrilla testing. So one of the cool things in this particular gallery space is that it's not a very large gallery, and this guy is at the center. So he's the main event in the gallery space. And we were using not a tablet, not a phone like this to test, but a tablet that was a little bit larger. And this was on purpose because a little bit larger means that a group of people can gather around this tablet. And people just came up to us right away. We obviously approached visitors and et cetera, but we kind of didn't even have to, because people were just kind of peeking up at us and they're like, oh, what are you doing? And they were really excited to just try it out. So I think people are yearning for this stuff, to be honest with you, in a museum. I think that people are really eager to find new ways to interpret the collection and find new ways to learn and engage about these different artifacts. Another thing, kind of unrelated, maybe related, museum guards are your friends. So if you're doing a project like this, make friends with the museum guards and the people that are within that space, especially because, a lot of the testing that we're doing this on days that the museum is open. And, museum guards are there and they're like, well, what are you guys doing? So you want to make friends with them. You want to excite them about the project. So we've actually had many situations which are kind of fun, where the museum guards that were rotating in and out of the gallery space, they were, willing to test with us, and they were willing to actually play with the app and kind of give their thoughts, because they're staring at this thing all day. So that was another really kind of fun discovery for us as we were testing.
Yeah, I love that. So kind of pulling on that thread you were talking about with creating an immersive experience, we have a question in the chat from some, just really around lighting and how you're matching virtual lighting and physical information and making all of those things kind of come together to create immersion.
Yeah, sure. So that's really important, especially for bronze, because bronze reflects light in a specific way. This gallery was quite dark, but we were still able to manage really good tracking. And the thing about lighting is that if you don't get it right, then your AR objects are going to look almost like too video gamey, which is a real turnoff. You want it to feel like it's really incorporated into the physical environment that you're in. So what we did is we actually measured the lighting within that space, and we were able to match it virtually so that the lighting on the recreation of the bronze matched the lighting in the gallery space. So that's important if you really want to make it feel like it's part of the actual environment that you're working with.
We also have a lot of questions kind of around what kind of previous knowledge you needed to bring to the table with this kind of project. So when you're designing these kinds of experiences, how familiar are you with that, the possible colors of ancient Greek sculptures and architecture, and how much information did your UX team need to contribute to that compared to maybe art historians bringing it to you, or do you need to have an arts background?
Do you mean more about the content or the technology?
I think these questions are kind of around the content itself. So
The content.
yeah.
Yeah, with all of the museum projects that I've done, there's always a content specialist, there's an acronym that I'm forgetting now, content expert specialist, content. Anyway, there's always a content specialist who's working with you and who is kind of like the holder of all of the, really juicy historical content. And I find that as a UX designer, you have to know it, like you have to learn it. I didn't come into this project knowing, anything about polychromy, and I studied it and I learned it so that I would be able to understand how to best tell this story. But then there are people who are there to support you, such as conservationist curators, researchers, and people who are actual specialists in the content. But I think that as UX designers, we do have to dive as deep into the actual content as possible and really be familiar with it so that we know what to do with it.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a set of questions that are kind of pulling on that idea of knowledge, where people are really curious about the kinds of tools that you were using. So whether what kind of special software or tools for just the experience for prototyping. We have a comment saying Figma can only go so far. So what kind of things were you using?
True story. Figma can only go so far, although I'll be honest, I did a lot of work on this just in Figma, starting from wireframes and then to the actual user interface. I have found that on these types of projects for AR, for VR, XR, whatever it is, I work it's a much closer collaboration with the developers that I'm working with than with other projects. So for 2D projects, for, web apps, mobile apps, etc., you kind of like you're in the design world and then you hand it off to the developers and then they build what you tell them. But in this situation, I found it much more of a closer collaboration just because it requires a lot of experimentation. I think that knowing Unity, the game engine, is really valuable, not in terms of you don't have to know how to code, but just to understand the interface and to understand at least a little bit the language that the developers who you're going to be working with speak is really valuable. So learning Unity, at least a little, just basics, and also GitHub, that's a versioning tool, are really important for XR projects. For designers and developers and kind of project managers are going to thank you if you know at least a little bit your way around those tools.
Yeah. So there's questions in here kind of about the team and the timeline that it took for something like this. How long did this project kind of go, and how big was the team that worked through that timeline?
Sure. Because it's ongoing, I would say that it's forever. It's a long project. Working with museums is to me, what I've discovered working with museums is that their timelines are much more extended than with other clients that I have. So with, brands or businesses, they plan out exhibitions 5 years ahead. So museums in general are just much slower to work with. So that's in terms of the timeline. In terms of the main players for a project like this, I would say we have a UX designer, UX researcher, a UI designer, so just designing the actual interface. And we had a 3D modeler to create the actual 3D models. And then we had one developer that was actually creating, developing the actual project. So those were like, and then a project manager. So those were the core team. So what is that, five or six people? And then kind of all of the consultants and all of the people that help you actually understand the content. That's a kind of separate team.
Yeah, so it's a fairly large endeavor
It's
as
an
you went through this.
Yeah, it's a large endeavor just because these type of projects, they're so interdisciplinary and they really do require lots of different skill sets, on the design aspect, on the development aspect, and on the 3D modeling aspect. I would say those three are like the core disciplines to create a project like this.
Yeah. So we're talking about, a lot of different people coming together with all of these different skills. Do you have workshops or resources for this kind of spatial design that you kind of recommend for designers who want to be, doing this kind of work?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I actually sometimes do a talk on called shifting dimensions, going from 2D to 3D design. So I have a lot of thoughts on it, and people feel free to get in touch with me if you have more questions. But just as a short answer, my into this space many years ago was actually because I became a photogrammetry hobbyist. So I really became obsessed with photogrammetry and with scanning kind of objects, artifacts from around the world. And that helped me understand 3D more. So that just helped me understand the 3D pipeline. That helped me understand what a 3D model is, what textures are, how to animate those. It helped me understand the workflow. I'm not saying that everybody should just go out and do photogrammetry. Start to study and at least a little bit understand what a 3D pipeline, what a 3D development pipeline is, just so that you can, again, start to speak the same language as developers, start to understand, what is AR in terms of, having objects be in world space versus screen space, and studying different apps out there is really huge. So if you're doing AR apps, then, look at all of the AR apps you possibly can and, investigate them, study them, have a critical eye for what's working, what's not working. Same with virtual reality, if you have access to a headset. But yeah, it's understanding the 3D space and really looking at as many different examples that already exist in this landscape as possible.
Yeah, I think that's great. And so, there was a lot of people wondering kind of how you got into this space and what they can do to kind of get on that track. So I think any additional information you have on that would be great. And I think people would really be kind of clamoring for those resources. But also
Yeah.
people are, oh yeah,
No, please go ahead.
I would say people are wondering kind of where you're headed next. Have you worked on any projects with contemporary art? And if so, how did that work go? And what are the goals?
I'm very much obsessed with this particular concept of recreating what something looked like originally. So my next kind of venture into this and continuing a project like this is to also include historic sites. So here we're focusing on a single sculpture, but what about a historical site that people visit? Something like, I don't know, the Roman Forum or the Alamo or whatever it is, or Angkor Wat. What can AR do? I think that those projects are probably going to be even more complicated and have their own set of challenges just because a single sculpture in a museum environment is very different from a very large site. But that's definitely something that I'm going to be exploring over the next several months.
This has been really fantastic. I know we're coming up to the top of the hour, so I do want to take a minute to just let everybody kind of thank you for what's going on. So if you could, give Lisa a huge round of applause, either with your video or hit the applause emoji. Thank you so much for all of this really great information, letting us see the really cool work that you're doing and really digging in on all of these questions. I think it's pretty evident from how, immersed people were and the depth of their questions, just how exciting this work is and how much they really loved your talk. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you guys so much. And please feel free to contact me with any questions. I'm very open to conversations. I love this stuff. I love helping newbies. I love just discussing anything related to UX and immersive tech. So please, anytime, contact me on my email, LinkedIn, anywhere.
Perfect. So hopefully somebody is going to drop all of that information to contact Lisa in the chat. The next part of tonight's meeting is our networking breakout room. Good. I think we're saying bye to Lisa.
Thank you
Bye.
guys so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. This was great.
introduce yourself, keep everything connected with the people that you're meeting today. And now at this point, let's open up for our happy hour. So please use the raise hand function to ask a question. Doesn't just have to be about something we've discussed tonight or really anything in particular, but remember, this is an open forum and anyone can feel free to kind of jump in and answer. So it doesn't have to be questions for me directly, questions for the group, and anybody can kind of offer their opinions. We love that thought diversity and diversity of experiences to kind of help each other through. And so again, if you have a question and you want to ask it, go ahead and use that digital hand raise. Anyone can go ahead and jump in and answer that question. And I just ask that we give others the chance to answer questions so that we can, again, provide that diversity of perspectives.
My group, I forgot what group it was, but it was the second breakout session. We started like ideating on AR and just its applications. And it was really cool how in our group, we just started, just spitfiring these ideas of like how we could use AR like in education, like history lessons was one thing. I had an idea to like apply it in the healthcare field to like identify skin cancers. Maybe, perhaps, I don't know if that's possible, but maybe with like AI, an AI database. And then one thing that really stood out to me was the image of antiquity, how she was speaking about it, and how like our preconceived notions about it are not exactly what is to be true. And that's literally what this AR technology like shows. So it's like, how else could we use that in real life? And I feel like in learning, you could really leverage it as far as like making education fun and engaging, maybe. Otherwise, that was it. Like that was all we came up with.
Anyone else have any cool applications that their group thought of? I love the idea of like kind of stretching this into new arenas, right? Like skin cancer and like the healthcare field. I think that's a really cool thought to kind of mull over, like the way that we can really extend this beyond the museum.
We were talking a little bit about tourism and education and like applying this to different kinds of spaces, especially with tourism.
Tourism would be really cool. I'm wondering, has anybody used any technology like this in there, or have they had discussions about trying to get, the ability to use something like this in their positions or in their work?
We were debating with the tourism thing whether it would encourage people in terms of interaction, like the guy that was scribbling on the Colosseum because he wanted to put his girlfriend's name on it, and if this would discourage behavior like that, or if it would make people more brazen in interaction. So we were talking about, and we started talking about virtual graffiti, but then on the other hand, it would devolve pretty quickly into people putting offensive stuff on that. But we were kind of like going back and forth about how if it would be possible or desirable to do that.
Yeah, virtual graffiti is a really interesting thought. You think a lot about how, I guess, society has reacted to graffiti in different ways across time and how that would really change that. Yeah, it could be a huge, step for just artists and things like that, kind of the way when you think about how social media has allowed people to kind of express themselves in different ways. It would be really interesting to think about how something like this could do something similar. Very cool. Yeah, Paul's talking about how you can do something unique while you're vacationing with something like this. That would be cool. Anyone else have thoughts on maybe how this could impact vacationing? Because I could see that being like, we're already talking about immersive experiences. Are there other kinds of immersive experiences you may want to see while traveling?
So currently my friend is working on a AR major project. So it's basically like giving a virtual tour beforehand, traveling to that specific destination, so that user will get to know about specific destination, whether it's worth spending or not. So that they, after like going to that specific destination and experiencing it and realizing that it's not that worth it, then the people would start regretting. Instead of regretting, they'll get a free hand experience before going to the specific destination.
Yeah, I saw you kind of have your hand, Alexandra. I'll call you out, but if you don't,
Yeah,
if
no, it's
I
actually
Sorry.
kind of funny because one of the groups in my like UX cert program, their application, we had to develop an iOS app, and their application was like a travel planning app. And we were encouraged to add like an AR, VR component to all, like every group was to their application. And the travel group, it was very similar to what you're saying, to what you just talked about. It was essentially like you could see like the map while you were not before, but like I don't even know how to explain it, but it was essentially when you're there, almost like directions, but in like when you put your phone up, like hold your phone up, it would kind of show you the way.
Like Google
And
Maps.
then, yeah, and then there was also like an event planning application, and their AR use was like seeing the event space. So kind of like you're saying, and that I think that extends to traveling, like being able to actually, how like hotels do a really good job of making those rooms look like big, and the colors are well saturated, like my obnoxious Zoom screen that I do apologize for. I just keep forgetting to remove it. And so it was really, I think it's great. I mean, just very to be able to know, okay, what is that experience? What is this room really? Like I've got a family of however many. Is this actually going to fit us, or you know? So I don't know.
I think that'd be huge, right? Like the bait and switch of some of that kind of photography might be a little bit
Yeah.
harder to do on a consumer when you can walk
Also
through.
places that you don't use or that you don't speak the native language, like being able to hold your phone up and whatever the image is, like it would speak, whether you're trying to communicate with somebody or it would tell you like what it's, I don't know, things like that is what I think of, but I've talked enough.
Thank you for, speaking up in front of the group. It's not always the easiest thing, so we appreciate it. Does anybody else want to kind of jump in on those thoughts? Rebecca, I see your hand.
Just an idea popped into my head about, creating an immersive experience while traveling, when in restaurants, because a lot of people, they love to go and try new foods when traveling. And I think being able to have some sort of interactive menu where you can, hold your phone up or something and use this app and be able to picture the meal and like all the ingredients and where they come from, kind of like a cultural experience, and kind of use that to preview and then before selecting your dish. It's something whenever I'm in restaurants, I'm always ogling other people's food, and I think that would be really cool.
That would be cool. Oh, Lynn?
I actually typed it in the chat, but like I used to teach a lot of students online during pandemic, piano and all different musical stuff, and it was tough. It was just tough when students are just not seeing your hand, like a real hand, because it's just like from a screen. And we were experimenting with like different angles and things like that. But I just think that once, like in the future, if the devices are more mature, maybe that's something that can help a lot of students from like education, or even some people that have a hard time to get out of their house, no matter if they're injured or they just disabled or anything, get them like into activities that will be good for them too. Yeah, so something like that in the future.
Yeah, I love that idea, that accessibility piece, like kind of extending it out. Serge, correct me.
It's Surge.
Surge, got it.
So that it reminds me of, we were talking in our group of like how we could use AR in a remote aspect too, and like you could like create like a shared space somehow. I don't know how that would work, but we were trying to ideate it, and I think Lynn was onto it. Like, but I think that's it's legit. Like, I just wanted to echo that.
Yeah. Divya.
Hi everyone. Yeah, my idea is like something after the Apple Vision Pro launched. I'm like trying to create a mock-up in Unity which is like it is something related to what Rebecca shared her thoughts about the food menu. Like if you're wearing the headset, the Apple Vision Pro, there is in your drawing room there can be that dish which which you would like to have it, or it is in your liking, and then you have to just click to that plate or whatever the dish is, and then it is showing the buying option in DoorDash or something, and then you can go to that buying option and then select it. You can see that visually, like what is in a real life. What is it's not in a cartoonish way, but a real dish, whatever you want, and then click to it and just buy it and order it. So the onboarding process, what Lisa told us, that the UX researchers want the onboarding should be very smooth, like the QR code or something clicking interactive. So like I want to create that type kind of a mock-up in Apple Vision Pro, which is coming. Any in VR. So
Yeah, something that would go from AR to like reality right in front of you pretty quickly could be a really cool, like,
even wearing AR glasses. Yeah.
yeah. Kim, do you wanted to throw something in there?
Oh, yeah, I'm super passionate about using immersive technology for improving mental health. And there are some people working in that space, and I'm super interested. It's a little bit at the intersection of art and 3D design, but being able to create conditions that can help people process, difficult memories, or that can help people to address phobias or address loneliness or address anxiety and those type of experiences, and how either virtual reality or augmented reality can be leveraged in that space. So that's something I'm like super interested in learning more about. So if anybody knows about that or wants to chat about that, feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to chat about that.
Yeah, I'll pose it to the group. Anybody have, thoughts, connections, interest in that direction?
Something real quick. Actually, I did a video game in Unity and then in Unreal Engine with the Vuforia camera. And we did two different things in the two different platforms for the development. And in Unity, we used actually real menus with AR, so we could get to know the recipe of the dish you were reading in the menu in another interface. So it was quite to let you know what the dish kind of had, if you have any allergies or anything to the ingredients, and if you wanted to know how it was made, also with background story of where the dish was created and such. So in the Unreal Engine, we did a kind of different thing where we had those typical alt text menus and you read them, but you showed a dry D model of the dish, the real dish, so you can see how it looked like. Even we use like proportion sizes for the dry D models, so you could know if you most likely were gonna eat a huge dish and you would even finish. So you could also shift if it was a medium size and larger size dish. So that was kind of cool, and we did
Yeah. I love it. And so we have some LinkedIn links being dropped in the chat. That's perfect. We also have a question Alexandra dropped in there. It says, wondering kind of how this technology can be used really to help people who have been excluded or who have disabilities and kind of make life better for them. Does anybody have kind of thoughts around that? We talked a little bit about, the piano and really helping people kind of get to that immersive tech space when they don't have the ability to be with a teacher directly. We talked about mental health, so I think those kind of tie in there. What about other thoughts on how we might be using this to kind of reach some of those often, overlooked populations?
I think like because of that, you don't necessarily have to go to a specific place to get to that experience. So it's like what other have mentioned. So I feel like in general, for those who cannot afford something, like for example, like go to a specific school or college or something, that might be a option for them in a far future. I think it's gonna be a far future, but hopefully we will get there eventually. I think we'll just make everyone's life a bit easier in general.
Yeah. Anyone else have thoughts on that? Things they want to add?
I also like to kind of elaborate a little bit. I'm also curious, has you okay? Baby choking herself on milk. I'm curious if anyone has also kind of thought about like how we get that population represented in the kind of extended reality space. And I know that like being a UX research group, that really starts with user research. And so I'm kind of curious if anyone's done any user research with any type of disabilities, whether it's vision, cognitive, mobility, you name it, like with the any AR VR technology.
Well, to that point, that's a good question, Alexandra, because I'm studying for the CPAC exam, which is an accessibility exam.
I know, I saw that and I was really excited, and I'm like,
oh, it's hard
yeah,
work.
I'm
It's
rooting
kicking my
for
ass.
you. I know, it's
Thank
on
you.
my list of to-dos, but I'm far from it. I'm totally rooting for you. I'm excited for
Thank you. I appreciate that. But it makes you think really differently. When you said, had I done any research, I have with blind users who used a screen reader. And if you've ever heard a screen reader, it just blows your mind how fast they read that to the, that is read to them like 7 times. You think 2 times YouTube is
poorly
fast.
things are designed and not designed for screen readers.
Yeah, so so I'm kind of wondering like what would an augmented reality experience be like for somebody who's blind? And I don't think, oh well, they wouldn't need it because it's all to be seen, but they do. I think there's some like thinking outside of the box, like how could you make that more bring them into that experience even if it's not 100%, right?
I know that hey, mommy's on a call, okay? Give me a little. Daddy can find the toothpaste in the bag, okay?
Now is the time.
It is bedtime and toothpaste. They ran out of toothpaste, so we had to get some more toothpaste. Sorry. What was I gonna say? Oh, good. We've also, the Ritalins also run out, so the ADD is real. Oh, there is, most of us are like familiar just with the headsets, and honestly, I was only familiar with the headset part. I mean, and the things you hold. I don't know what they're called. Sorry for my lack of terminology there, but I took a web AR, VR, and hologram like design course, and the instructor is very like much immersed in the right now, and he said they have like tactile stuff, like stuff that you wear on your hands that gives input in that way. And so yeah, I often wonder like how might we, like you said, Jen, provide experiences that include things like that. After I went to Access U this year, the web accessibility conference, and after that my brain's just been like 90 miles an hour, because there was a lot of discussion of AR VR and how some were excited and a lot were like against it and not happy about it, and felt like we can't even get representation with like, we're just now starting to kind of get caught up with like the WCAG 2.2. How are we gonna how are we gonna get in, how are we going to be considered with all this AR VR stuff, and we can't even get the 2D stuff right? So, but my brain kind of goes to like, well, there's an opportunity and like there, and how might we? But I was just curious if anyone else had like thought of it or had any experiences with some of that.
Yeah, does anybody?
Sorry.
Oh, I was just like thinking about binaural audio, like 3D audio. I know Apple's doing a lot with that, and I'm not sure like how much of the work being done in the AR space right now is taking that into account. But with building applications that are accessible for visually impaired users, that would definitely be something to consider.
Ooh,
Yeah.
we have a request to hear that again.
Oh, yeah. So I was talking about binaural audio, three-dimensional audio. Apple is working a lot with this, putting out more content that uses that type of spatialized audio. So I think a lot of like AR stuff that I've seen is very visually focused, but for visually impaired users, incorporating that spatial audio as part of the experience would be one way to make it more accessible.
I see your hand, Serge.
Yeah, so I'm gonna try to answer Alexandra. So in my coursework right now, or no, last semester, we had to do research for one of our designs, redesign. And in order to like make it more accessible, I decided to interview 5 key users, and among them, I said I was going to interview a male, a female, a non-binary individual, and then somebody with a vision impairment, like that either wears glasses. So since I was testing a site, a website, I thought that would be great just to see how somebody with glasses or visual impairment would be using my website. So like whenever you are designing or creating a study, or you're at that phase, you may want to like try to find somebody that is differently abled and try to test out your product or your design on them. And you could do that by really just reaching out on like social media, or just like people you know. Really, that's what I do. I used to work at a pharmacy, and I know 1,000 people by first and last name, and I'll call on them.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate all of the really rich conversation we've had today. Thank you so much to everyone who stayed with us to the end of this happy hour. We're right here at the end of the event. We had a great time. This was a great event. We had a lot of great conversations, and we'll hope that you join us for the next event as well. So we'll see you on the socials. We'll see you in Slack. Please fill out the survey and provide your feedback, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
I would like to know when is the next event going to happen?
Sure, I can answer that. We have a workshop coming up on August 8th, a 3-hour workshop with an expert out of Australia. And it's about mixed methods, qual, quant, and coming up with a research plan using a variety of methods. I will throw this in here's our Eventbrite link so you can see all of our events. We also have one coming up. Where's the chat? We also have one with David De Leon. He is working on a book about feedback with UX within UX. But this is a focus not just if you're a UX designer. How do you participate in providing and accepting feedback if you're not a UX designer? A lot of times we have feedback sessions where we're giving feedback to the designer, right? So that is on, I believe that's the 24th of August, but the next one is August 8th, and that's our mixed method research workshop, hands-on workshop, virtual. So if you follow the group on, Eventbrite, if you follow the group, you'll be notified as soon as we post something new.
Excellent. Thank you all so much.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Nathan. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
All right, everybody, thank you. Thanks to Adrian too for being such a great host. Woohoo!
Thank you all.
Have a good night, morning, afternoon, wherever you are. Bye.